Hi, I'm Alejandro Pereira, and this is the Impossible to Ignore presentation by me. So the first part of this is the directions. So the directions were to take one or two frameworks in the reading and apply them to scenarios or problems that are not covered in the books. And to start off with, I came up with these ideas because they're ideas that have stuck with me, and also I enjoy soccer, so it's something that I can easily talk about. Um, Ideas for the problems in the frameworks are soccer cleats and their distinctiveness, and insurance ads. So, as you can see to the right, there's a picture of Flo from Progressive, and this is the insurance ad that I'm talking about, although it can be for other ads as well. And then also above that picture, you can see the different types of soccer cleats. Some of them are Nike, Puma, Adidas. There's a lot of different types of soccer cleats, and we'll get into how we can get those to be more distinctive in this next slide. So, this first slide that I am looking at is the isolation effect slide. And this definitely applies to soccer cleats because when something stands out and it is compared with neighboring items, it commands a privileged spot in memory. That's what the isolation effect is. So, how do we apply that to soccer cleats and other things in our lives? Well, this is why we create content. It is useful to ask things like, how many items do we want to isolate? Um, do they represent the most important content we want others to remember? So, in terms of how many items we want to isolate, we're talking about the soccer cleats, right? So, if we want to isolate that cleat in the middle, we have to figure out a way to make that happen where it's different and distinctive from the other brands or other same variations of that cleat in the same brand. So another thing is, do they represent the most important content we want other people to remember? So do these cleats reach out to the consumers that we want it to reach out to? And how are we going to do that? So it's easier to remember items that are more distinct in a crowd of similar items or items with no neighbors. So you look at this image that I put on the slide, that red circle in the middle, it's easy to distinct it from the other white triangles because it's so different and distinct from those triangles. And then we look at the item with no neighbors, which is that red circle next to all those triangles. It's very easy to pinpoint that just because it's by itself. So in other words, the more similar things are, the harder it will be to retrieve them later. When we're talking about distinctiveness, distinctiveness is absent. We end up creating content for our competition because 2 days from now, a prospect will find it difficult to remember who said what. So, to distinct ourselves from other people, we have to make sure that people can remember who said what. In business, when many messages are the same, we can end up creating distinctiveness, and therefore we can improve the recall by consumers of them remembering that product by being specific about these rewards that you're going to receive from wearing the product. So in this case, it's soccer cleats, right? So what will you get out of wearing that soccer cleat? What will people remember about the rewards that it can give? This type of frame will reach these tangible results that we're looking for when we're talking about reaching out to our consumers. Um, the next thing is reflect on your own content. Can you identify outcomes of your work that help you differentiate your message from too much sameness in your field? Soccer cleats, it can get a bit repetitive, but over the years, luckily, there has been a steady increase of different types of cleats, their variations, different studs on the bottom of the cleat. You look at the style on the outside of the cleat. Is it made for defenders? Is it made for midfielders? Is it made for forwards and attackers? Um, so, how do you differentiate yourself from the sameness in that field of, in this case, soccer cleats, right? To continue, then we look at too much variety, making it harder for an item to be perceived as distinct. As you can see in the image, now that red circle is surrounded by other red items. They may not be a circle, but they're still red. They still are very similar to that red circle in the middle. And this is kind of what we look at when we are talking about the soccer cleats, because you see the red circle could be a Nike cleat, but then it's surrounded by its competitors, which is a red square, a red triangle, all these other different things. And then we look at that neighboring red circle in the middle by itself, and it's distinct. It's by itself. It's isolated. You can remember it well. So it's really important also to make maybe not too much variety, because that variety can actually create the sameness in that group of cleats. The irony is that actually the similarity is mandatory for enabling distinctiveness. Think of it this way: after having a bunch of formal meetings in an office, a meeting in a coffee shop is distinct. To perceive distinctiveness, we must perceive similarity. In this case, the cleats, we need to have a framework of the cleat that we're trying to build and how we're trying to make it distinct, because we have to perceive that similarity for it to be distinct. It's also useful to consider the intensity we apply to distinct items, because when something is too strong, neighboring items may be forgotten. If you make one cleat or style too distinct from what your group of cleats is trying to achieve, then it could turn out to be a little bit forgotten in the other cleats. People won't buy those. People will only buy the one pair. And then your other ones are basically useless. Not useless, but it's harder to remember them. And when we're talking about that recall by consumers, it's really important that they remember all your products and not just one of them. The largest effects have been obtained using size, color, and spacing manipulations. This is because the size of the cleat is very important for soccer players and people that compete at high levels, because if you have too big of cleats, then it's a little too bulky. People want something more agile, more light, more quick. The color is very important. People don't want ugly colors on their feet when they're playing. They want something that looks cool, clean, precise, and the spacing manipulations are important, especially when using the logos on the cleats. You don't want to make it too big. You don't want to make it too close to a certain part of the shoe. So these things are really important. And moving on, for this slide, I wanted to start talking about the progressive commercials, because I think it's really important that brands use exaggerations and hyperbole as a means of distinctiveness, which leads to long-lasting memory. A good example of this, other than progressive, from the book is that, does America really run on Dunkin'? You know, progressive uses exaggeration in their commercials because it works. It's dramatic. And exaggeration works when it is dramatic. When you disregard accuracy, you command attention and impact the memory of your consumers. Um, this kind of falls into the degree of drama category. When you're looking at reflecting on your own content, you consider creating something that is distinct, yet it fits with what an audience considers to be rewarding. In this case, for the progressive commercials, it's, will they be covered in the case of an emergency, or in the case that they need to use their insurance? And that's what the reward is that progressive is giving to its consumers. This way you have the best of both worlds: a distinct element that attracts attention in these commercials. It's not filtered out, and it stays on people's minds for the long term. With these commercials, every time that I watch them, they stay in my mind. I think about them. I think they're funny. I think they're a bit exaggerated. I don't think that things like that happen in real life with insurance commercials, but it sticks in my head, and that's what's the most important part about it. Creates a bit of distinctiveness with this degree of drama that we're using. So you also have to create distinctiveness by thinking in opposites. What does your audience consider the opposite of what you presented for a while? So in these commercials, it's really important that if progressive follows with something, that they use the opposite to maybe emphasize the point that they're trying to make. So a bad driver and a good driver, good weather, bad weather. Things like that are really important, especially because we're talking about something that may not um, be thought of by the consumers. You also have to remember that it is easier to remember how you solved a problem than trying to memorize someone else's solution, um, which means try things on your own, different ideas. An example is Map My Run, a company that basically you run and you create shapes of where you're running. So you could run and you could create a shape of a bunny or a soccer ball or anything like that. It's creative and it helps people memorize and have that recall about these things. And as you create content for others, also invite them to answer the question, how does this content represent you? So, how does progressive help people? How does it represent them as an actual human being? Because a lot of people make mistakes, a lot of people need insurance, a lot of people um, feel that they want a brand that represents them, not just the brand itself. Where does the brand fit in with their reality in their everyday life? These things are important to think of when creating this distinctiveness that we're talking about. Another thing is, can you identify ways to create distinctive content by using a human approach to business? In this case, Progressive, they use Flo as a human approach to business because they use her to speak to the consumers and have them use Flo as the voice for their brand. You can achieve distinctiveness with a human touch and deep meaning, and that's what this is. A good example of this is not only just Flo from Progressive, but when we look back to the other example that we use, which is the distinctiveness in soccer cleats and different variations of soccer cleats. A way that they use human touch and deep meaning to it is that they make custom cleats or shoes um, that are sponsored by a professional athlete. They don't only do this in soccer, they do it in football, volleyball, basketball, whatever the case may be. They add that human touch and that deep meaning to the product by associating it with another human being who is a professional athlete. An example of that could be Neymar with Nike, although he just moved to Puma. So now he's representing Puma in their soccer cleats, which definitely gives the brand Puma a big lift. So I think that's a really good way. And thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much. It's better than the first time.
I think you did a really good job on that.
Oh boy, I need to cut this for sure.